All right. So today we're going to talk about counteroffers. And before we pop in, we're actually going to look at two documents today. One's the counteroffer to or modification of the unaccepted original offer. And the other document is the notice to withdraw offer. And it makes sense to bring that in, and it will make sense why I brought that in as we go through this document. But before we look at the documents, I just want to talk about counteroffers in general, because if we're making a counteroffer, we could be on either side of the transaction, right? We could be the buyer has submitted an offer to us and we're countering on behalf of the seller, or the seller has counteroffered to the buyer and the buyer is now counteroffering back. So there's multiple ways that we can handle counteroffers, and the first two ways I want you to consider it is it a formal counteroffer or is it an informal counteroffer? And I tend to like a formal counteroffer the majority of the time. And what I mean by a formal counteroffer is we have given them the documents they need to sign to accept the offer. Okay, we've made it easy for them. All that person has to do is sign the counteroffer, and boom, we're under contract and we're binding. Okay, and so when we make it really easy for them, you know, they've got that consideration on the other side that if I counteroffer back or if I delay, that property may go under contract with somebody else, right? If I'm the buyer and the seller has sent me a counteroffer, if I sign it, we're under contract and we're headed to the closing table. If I'm the seller and the buyer has sent me a counteroffer, if I counteroffer back, that buyer may give up and go ahead and move on. So I want to make it as easy as possible for that buyer to sign. And so I like the formal for that reason. But there are times where we know we're far enough apart or something is unusual in the negotiations that it makes sense to be informal. And by informal, I mean making a counteroffer through a phone call, through an email, or through text. Okay, where we're basically having a conversation with the agent on the other side. Okay, and it may be we don't want to waste our time, we don't want to waste the agent's time on the other side because there's too big of a divide between us. We have a listing and somebody sends us an offer for $50,000 under the list price, and we know that our client has room to move, but they're only going to move $10,000. Well, I may not even want to draw a counteroffer up for $10,000 below what the list price was. I may just want to call and have a conversation with the other side and say, we got your offer. I've shared it with the sellers. We've had conversations about it. And we're so far apart, we don't feel like there's any need to counteroffer. But if your client would like to come back with a better offer and offer closer to list price, we can certainly continue this conversation. So that may be one possibility. You know, it could also be that they've asked for something out of the unusual. You know, we've sent a counteroffer to the buyer. So the seller got an offer and we're sending a counteroffer to the buyer. And the buyer wants to know they're willing to take that price if we'll leave the pool table. Okay. I might not want to write that up into a contract. I probably want to have a conversation with the other agent because that buyer may not care about the pool table at all. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. But the one thing that I want you guys to be really careful of, even in your informal conversations, don't bind your client. You legally, you can't. but I don't want you to emotionally bind your client in a contract. And what I mean by that is, let's say that we got an offer from a buyer and the seller, it's closed, but it's not quite where we want to be. And we called the other agent up and said, hey, got your offer, talk to the seller about it. If you guys can do this, then we have a deal. Okay. Well, they get excited, they write it up, they send it back over to us, but 5 minutes before we got their counter offer back or their second offer, we got another offer for $15,000 more. What's the seller going to want to do? Take the one that's $15,000 more. And we couldn't bind our client the first time. So even when we told them, if you do this, we have a deal. Do we have a deal? No. But emotionally, does the person on the other side feel like we have a deal? Yeah. Okay. So instead, make sure to watch your verbiage and say, hey, if you guys can do this on this side, I think that the seller would be inclined to accept that. Okay. Provided we don't get any other offers. Do we now have the same expectation? Are they going to feel the same way if we end up getting a better offer? No, they're not going to. They still know it's not theirs yet. Okay. So just be careful in your informal negotiations. But that's a necessary thing. It's a good tool to have. And don't be afraid to negotiate informally. But what we're going to go through today is teaching you how do you send a formal counteroffer. And there's 3 different ways we can formally send a counteroffer. Okay? And the first one is going to be going old school. Okay. And that's strike through and initial. This goes back to the days when we used to have to line our contracts up in the typewriter and get the little blanks lined up and have to type everything in, and we've got carbon paper and it's in triplicate. And the last thing we wanted to do was write a whole new contract, right? So if there was something we didn't like, you would strike through it, you would write what you wanted it to be instead, and then you would have both parties initial it. Okay. So in practice, Amy, you send me, you're representing the buyer, I'm the seller, you send me a contract. I'm happy with everything except for the price. Okay. I would just need to line through the price, put the price we want. My seller still needs to sign everywhere they needed to sign on the contract, and they need to initial the change in price. Well, the buyer's already signed everywhere. All they have to do now for us to have a binding contract is initial that one change. We both have to have agreed to the change. Okay. Does that seem like a pretty simple thing to do? That is a really good way to go if we're only changing 1 or 2 very simple things on a contract. Okay. If we're having to rewrite contract or rewrite special stipulations with different verbiage, if we're making 6 or 7 changes through the contract, strike through and initial is not going to be our best choice. Okay. The one thing that I do want to caution you about is once we have a counteroffer to or modification to original unaccepted offer, okay, or if we've gone binding on a contract, we can't go back and use strike through an initial. Okay. This is only while we're still in the offer process and can't have any amendments, can't have anything extra in there to be considered. Okay. So we're just doing that at the very beginning. The second way that we can counteroffer a contract or an offer is write a whole new contract. Okay. And there's a few times when we're going to want to do that. And it seems like a lot more work. and it can be, but we want to do the right things to protect our client. One of the reasons we would want to completely rewrite the contract is they sent us the contract on RE forms instead of on GAR forms. For agents that don't belong to the board, they don't have access to the GAR forms. They use forms that were created by the MLS services that are called RE forms. We as a brokerage, we don't like them. Me personally, I don't like the RE forms. So even if, Chris, you sent me an offer and I like the price, I like the days of due diligence, the financing looks strong, I'm okay with everything in your offer, but it's on an RE contract, I'm going to rewrite the whole contract on GAR forms, put the same price, the same days of due diligence, the same financing contingency. I'm going to have my client sign it, and I'm going to send it back to you, okay, for your client to sign and accept. That way it's on our preferred forms, okay? The two things in both of these situations that we just talked about that you do have to be cautious of is pay attention to the time limit of offer, okay? So on the strike through an initial, so Amy sent me an offer last night that expired at 5 o'clock today. And I struck through the price, put the new price, had my client sign it, send it to her, but I don't send it to her until 4:30 today. Well, the contract still says the time limit of offer is 5 o'clock today. Okay. So I may need to change both the price and give them enough time to consider the counteroffer. And when I rewrite the contract from RE forms to GAR forms, don't necessarily use their dates that they put on there for the time limit of offer. Give them a reasonable amount of time. Don't just copy what was there. Does that make sense? Okay. And then the last way, and we just lost Chris, so it is just you and me, Amy. So, and then the last way is the counter offer or modification to unaccepted original offer. And have I got you looking at the right page, Amy? Do you see the contract or do you see Zoom?
I see the contract.
Perfect.
Or the counter offer.
The counter offer page. Perfect. And we're looking at the right one. So let's walk through this because while it's a pretty simple form, there are some really powerful stuff that's in here. So it starts out with at the top, this counter offer is made at 1:30 p.m. on the date of August 26th. This counteroffer modification, as may be, of the original unaccepted offer set forth in the purchase sales agreement dated. So the whatever purchase and sales agreement we're doing this counteroffer to, what's the date on that? And notice this isn't a binding agreement date, right? Because it's an offer. There's no binding agreement date on an offer. That's once we have a contract. So this is when did they send that contract? What was the date on it? Including all exhibits attached hereto or incorporated by reference therein for the property located at 123 Main Street, Snellville, Georgia 30078. Okay. Then we get into the meat. So first paragraph, previous counteroffers rejected. The party making this counteroffer acknowledges that in doing so, it constitutes a rejection of the original offer as presented and all previous counteroffers. Okay. So one of the things I want you to take away from that is once we send a counteroffer, we can't go back and accept the original offer or counteroffer, one from the past. Okay. We have to do another counteroffer. We have to move forward because all of the others have been rejected. The original offer and all previous counteroffers are no longer available for acceptance. Okay. What we just talked about. We can't go back to a previous one and accept that. Third paragraph, no previous counteroffer shall be considered a part of any agreement between the parties. This is where it gets interesting, and you have to keep this in mind, is when we use this form, this counteroffer form, our offer or our contract now is a pair of documents. It's this form and the purchase and sales agreement. Okay, they work in tandem. One can't exist without the other once we've included this form. Okay, but there can only ever be one counteroffer. So you send me an offer, Amy, I fill this form out and send you a counteroffer. You don't like my counteroffer, you fill out another one of these and send it to me. The one that I sent you is trash. Crumble it up and throw it away. All that exists now is the original purchase and sales agreement and the most recent counteroffer. Okay, everything else belongs in the trash can. And so where you have to be really careful here is, let's say that in my counteroffer, I said, let's make change A, B, C, and D. Okay, you're okay with change A, you're okay with change B, you don't like change C, you don't like change D, but instead you propose E. Okay, on your counteroffer, all of those have to be included. C and D are in the trash, okay, but so are A and B. So your counteroffer has to be change A, change B, and change E in order for you to make the counteroffer you want. Did that make sense? See, okay. I finally saw your nodding head. Chris, makes sense to you? Okay, good. All right. And forward, nothing requires the other party to continue the negotiations. So just because I send you a counteroffer, you don't have to accept it, reject it. You don't even have to respond or acknowledge that you got it. Okay, that's not a requirement. Paragraph B, the relationship between the original offer and this counteroffer. The original offer is hereby incorporated by reference into this counteroffer. However, the terms of this counteroffer shall modify and control over any conflicting or inconsistent provisions contained in the original offer. So just know this is the most powerful document in the transaction. Everything that's on this overwrites anything that came before. Okay, so we want to make sure whatever's on here is correct. Paragraph C, effects of accepting this counteroffer. When this counteroffer is signed by the buyer and seller and a copy of the same is delivered to both parties, the original offer as modified by this counteroffer constitutes a legally binding agreement. Okay, so let me read that again. When the counteroffer is signed and a copy is delivered to both the buyer and seller, we have a legally binding contract. Okay, so the only thing we have to sign is this document. And it tells us so in the next sentence. Since the original offer, including all exhibits thereto, is incorporated by reference into this counteroffer, only this counteroffer needs to be signed to create a legally binding agreement between the parties. So I send Chris an offer. Okay, Chris's client doesn't like the offer. My client signed it all before we sent it, right? Chris didn't like the offer, so he fills out a counteroffer form and has his client sign the counteroffer form, and he sends it to me. All my client has to do is sign the counteroffer form, and we have a legally binding contract. His client never signed the purchase and sales agreement. He never signed the seller's property disclosure. He never signed the community association disclosure. He didn't sign the FHA exhibit. Okay, and that's perfectly okay. We have a binding contract. There is one exception to this, okay, that I want you guys to be aware of. And that's because our contracts are based on Georgia law. there is a federal law that requires that for a property built before 1978, including any portion thereof, that before you can have a legally binding contract, you have to have what? I see you mouthing it, Chris. The lead-based paint exhibit.
Lead paint.
Yep, that is exactly right. So federal law says that we have to have that document. So keep in mind, while you don't have to sign the contract or the community association disclosure, the financing exhibit, if that house was built before 1978, you do have to have a signed lead-based paint exhibit in order to have a binding agreement. Okay. So even though the contract says you don't, the contract's written based on Georgia law, federal law says we need to have it, and so we have it. And one of the things that you will find that comes up is with your FHA and your VA loans. Now, this isn't law, okay? This is a practice of FHA and a practice of VA. They will not underwrite a loan unless there is a signed FHA amendatory clause or a signed VA amendatory clause, depending on the type of loan. Okay. Both of those are federal entities. Okay. So that kind of falls into that federal Trump state. But just know that even though in order to have a binding contract, the other party didn't have to sign the financing contingency, if it was an FHA or a VA exhibit, the bank is not going to underwrite the loan unless those are signed, or we signed another amendment that includes the amendatory clause. Okay. And if you don't know what the amendatory clause is, that's the appraisal clause in the FHA and the VA exhibit. Okay. Is everybody with me so far? All right. So paragraph D. And you are welcome. Clean copy of the agreement. At any time prior to closing, either party, if so requested by the other, shall sign a conformed or clean copy of the agreement, combining the terms of the original offer with the controlling and supplemental provisions. Okay. So what this is saying is here we have our offer and our counter offer. We have both documents. If either party, the buyer or the seller, wants the other to do it, we're both agreeing that we'll completely rewrite the contract as one document. We'll redo a purchase and sales agreement with all the information from the counter offer put on that agreement. Okay.
Is the original offer date put on that? On the new document?
You would, yes. Yes, it would be. Now, the date we signed it obviously is going to be a later date, but we can use the original offer date. We're going to put the same closing date. Everything that was on the original document, we're just going to copy it right over. Okay. But those signatures are going to come later. Now, here's the thing about this. Our broker doesn't like it. I don't recommend that you do it unless the other party requests it. There's no reason for you to, I've got the hiccups and I apologize. There's no reason for you to request a conformed copy. Okay. And the reason we don't is anytime we go and rewrite something, what do we run the risk of? Making a mistake, right? Transposing something, missing a digit. And we want to minimize the opportunity for us to make mistakes. But just know, even though we think it's a bad idea and we don't want to do it, if the other side asks, we have to do it. And when we do that, there is a special stipulation that needs to be included in that. So this is special stipulation 622. So when you see this include SS 622, That SS is special stipulation. That's going to be in the GAR special stipulations list. Okay, you can go take that language and include that in there. Then we get to the section where we put what has changed. Okay, and so E is the terms and conditions, and this is set up just like the first page of the purchase and sales agreement. We've got the purchase price, the closing cost, the closing and possession date, holder of the earnest money, closing attorney, our earnest money, our due diligence period, and what's the timeline of our counteroffer. And my recommendation, the document goes on from here, but my recommendation is if you can't put all of your changes on this page, this isn't the right form to use. Okay. What follows on the second page after the buyer and seller's initials is a big, huge blank. This is where we add the special stipulations, or we write any other changes that were taking place. Most of the time, if we need to be writing something back here, the better thing for us to do is just rewrite the contract. If I'm having to explain that the language in the special stipulation is changed from this to this, we just got confusing. Okay. If I'm trying to put in here that this special stipulation is removed from the previous contract, don't go rewrite a new contract. I know it's a little more work, but it creates clarity around what everybody is agreeing to. Okay. But if your changes can be limited to this page where we're just changing a price, changing a date, or changing a person, and it's that simple, that's an easy enough change that we can do it. And we can change all of those if we need to. If we're not making a change, leave it blank. Okay. It tells us right here, the sections not filled in or marked NC for no change shall not be a part of this counteroffer and shall remain the same as set forth in the original offer. So if we like the price, leave this blank. And if you're a type of person that just hates leaving something blank, put N/C in here. Okay, just to make yourself feel good. It's not necessary, but don't go back in and put the original price. Because what we're saying is anything we fill in here is we're changing this from the original contract. If we're not making a change, don't fill anything in. Does that make sense? Fantastic. And then we get down to the regular signature page that we're used to. We've got initials at the bottom of the second page as well. We've got a repeat when the counteroffer is made at the top of the signature page. But we've got our buyers and our sellers and both of the brokers. And then this is where we'll fill out the binding agreement date instead of on the original purchase and sales agreement. Okay. And that finishes that document out. Guys, do you have any questions about this form and when the right time to use this form is? All right, awesome. Well, while we're talking about counteroffers, I want to bring this form up. Notice to withdraw offer. And let you guys know when this is really, really important. And it's typically only when there's counteroffers being made. Okay. So let me ask you, Amy, how many properties can I buy? I want to buy one house. Okay. You take me out showing houses this weekend. How many houses can I make an offer on?
As many as you want.
Many as I want. Okay. But I only want to buy one.
Then you only go binding on one.
Only go binding on one. Well, what if sellers sign 2 of my offers and send it back to me? And now I've got 2 binding contracts.
Then you're probably going to have to do this form.
No, because we've got a binding contract. This is a notice to withdraw offer. I've got 2 binding contracts. So if I want to get rid of a contract, what do I do? put you on the spot. So,
No,
now you've done this before. When you've got a buyer that's under contract and they don't want to move forward, what do?
they withdraw. Well, this doesn't seem to make sense if they're already under contract.
Well, I'm not asking you about this form right now. I'm
Okay.
I'm trying to help you understand why this form is important. From a buyer perspective, if I find myself in a situation where I'm under contract on 2 properties, I've got 2 binding agreements, what do?
You're going to terminate
I'm going to
Right.
terminate one of them. That is exactly right.
as
So
long as you're still in due diligence.
as long as I have a due diligence period in both of my offers, whichever one I like best, I can move forward with and terminate the other one. What did it cost us?
Nothing as long as you're still in due diligence.
That is exactly right. Okay. Now let's look at the other side of the equation. Let's say your seller is under contract and they want to get out of the contract. What do?
Can they terminate as long as it's in due diligence? Or they are
bound.
they're stuck.
Bound to unless the buyer defaults, the seller can't terminate the contract. Okay. So would it be a good thing or a bad thing for your seller to be under contract with 2 different buyers?
Yes, a bad thing.
It would be a horrible thing. You are exactly right. Okay. That's the danger. Okay. You don't ever want to find your seller in a situation where they're in 2 binding contracts for the same property. So this is where the counteroffer comes in. So Amy, you represent a buyer and you sent me an offer on my property. I didn't like your offer. And I sent you a counteroffer back. Okay. Well, while I was waiting for you to respond to that, Chris sent me a great offer. My client loves it. So we sign and accept the offer from Chris and we're binding, and I send it back to Chris that we're binding. And 5 minutes later, I get my signed counteroffer from you in my email. Is that a problem?
Yeah, you want to withdraw this offer.
I want to withdraw the offer from you before I accept the offer from Chris. Okay. As much as I love that offer from Chris, okay, if representing a seller, I have sent out a counteroffer and we get an offer we like better, I need to run and not walk to the computer and put together a notice to withdraw offer. Okay. Because time is of the utmost importance. Because if you sign and send me back the counteroffer while I'm putting this together, if I send this to you after you've signed, is this valid at all?
Yes.
No.
Wait a minute. Okay, I'm sorry.
So I have to send you the notice to withdraw offer before you've accepted my counteroffer. As soon as you've accepted it, as soon as it hits my inbox, we're in a contract and cannot terminate that contract unless the buyer defaults. Okay. So if I want to pull my offer back, I need to run to the computer, get this done ASAP. I need to tell my client, you need to sign this right now before they accept our other offer.
So this is only done for a seller.
Yeah, it could be for a buyer as well, but there's no reason for me to do it with a buyer if I have due diligence. Okay.
Right. That's what I was thinking.
I want you to imagine for a second you're a seller. Okay. And my buyer has sent an offer to you. Okay. And you're entertaining it, and my buyer finds another house they like better. and I call you up as the agent. I'm like, hey, Amy, my buyer just found another property. They want to withdraw their offer. And I don't send you this document. Okay. Are you still going to go to your client and get them to sign that offer, knowing that my buyer doesn't want to buy it?
No,
No. And if you did, even if you did go get them to sign it, what's my buyer going to turn around and do?
terminate.
Terminate the contract. Okay. So my buyer's not stuck. Okay. So I don't need to do this. Just let the other agent know. And if they have any intelligence whatsoever, even just a thimbleful, they're not going to get the signature done. Okay. But for that, if my buyer were buying with 0 days due diligence, and we had made an offer with 0 days due diligence, and I found a property we liked better, I would definitely want to withdraw that offer before they accepted it, or else I'd be putting my earnest money at risk, my client. Okay. But for that seller, this becomes paramount. If we've sent out a counter offer, we'd want to do it. And that's one of those cases where there may be a time where we want to do an informal counter offer instead of a formal counter offer. Because if I know I've got 6 showings today and I may get some other offers, but I want to try and further things along with you, Amy, may call you up and say, Amy, we kind of like your offer, but we'd like to see these changes in it. You know, if you want to resubmit your offer with those changes, I think there's a really good chance that the seller would accept it. Well, now I don't have a counter offer hanging out there that I have to worry about withdrawing if I get another offer I like better from the other side. And it buys me a little bit of time. I'm moving the conversation forward with you and hopefully moving us toward a binding contract with the informal counteroffer I'm making, but I'm leaving that door open that I may get another offer. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So I may choose intentionally, let's not make a formal counteroffer. Let's do an informal counteroffer in a situation like that. Okay. So, but looking at this form, it's a pretty simple form. This notice is given on this date in reference to a certain offer or counteroffer dated whatever date we sent the counteroffer between the buyer's name and the seller's name pertaining to the purchase of real estate property at and the property address. And we just check a box, the buyer or the seller. Okay. And most of the time when we use this form, it's going to be the seller. Seller hereby gives notice to all parties of the immediate withdrawal of the signer's last offer or counteroffer to purchase the above referenced property. And that is it. Okay. And then that side, whoever's giving notice, usually the seller, is going to sign it. And we're probably going to be sending that via email. And we're done. Okay. But I just needed you guys to know that this existed. So when you send a counteroffer as a seller, you know you can't accept any other offer until either your counteroffer that you made expires or you have sent this notice to withdraw offer. And then you're free to do whatever you want to. Is that helpful? Does that all make sense? All right. Well, fantastic. Well, guys, that is all that I had planned for today. You know, you guys are always welcome to call me, text me, or email me if you need anything. And Amy, I will get back with you in just a few minutes on the email that you sent me.